Hello and welcome back to the Electronic Intifada's live stream for Thursday, December 14th. Thank you for tuning in and welcome to all of our viewers and listeners. I'm Nora Barrows-Friedman with my colleagues Asa Winstanley, John Elmer, Tamara Nassar, and Ali Abunimah. It's day 69 of Israel's genocide in Gaza. And first, I wanted to say that we're so grateful to everyone who tuned in on Monday for our show, honoring our friend and contributor Rifat Al-Hariri, and who sent us messages telling us how much they were touched by Rifat's life and work and our celebration of him on Monday's live stream. So thank you. Today, we will take a look at Israel's attempt at crafting an image of victory using the brutal spectacle of mass arrests of civilians, their military's attempt to hide casualty figures from the ground war in Gaza, and we'll break down a number of videos from the resistance showing a completely different picture of the fighting than the one Israel is trying to sell to the world. But first, a brief overview of the news from the ground. The Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza has reported that there have been more than 18,600 Palestinians killed and more than 50,000 injured since October 7th, with many more people missing and buried under the rubble, still awaiting rescue or recovery. Yesterday and today, Israeli heavily bombarded from the air, land, and sea across Gaza, especially in Jabalia in the northern Gaza Strip and in Khan Yunis in the south. Al Jazeera reported on Wednesday that Israeli forces attacked the Shadia Abu Ghazala school in the northern Gaza Strip, where displaced people had taken shelter. Eyewitnesses told Al Jazeera that they had later found their family members dead, shot, quote, execution style by Israeli forces in classrooms. Israeli forces are continuing to bomb, besiege, and destroy hospitals in Gaza, waging what a UN health official called an unrelenting war on the health system across the coastal enclave. Doctors are warning that without an immediate end to Israel's bombing and proper shelter, sanitation, medicine, food, and water, the healthcare system is coming to a cataclysmic collapse. The Palestinian Health Ministry in Gaza reported on Wednesday that children's vaccines have completely run out, which will cause, quote, catastrophic health repercussions on children's health and the spread of diseases, especially among the displaced in overcrowded shelter centers. On Wednesday, for the second consecutive day, Israeli troops, accompanied by tanks, raided Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, north of Gaza City, with reports of mass arrests and abuse of people who they have detained, according to the United Nations. Only 11 out of 36 hospitals across Gaza, including only one in the northern area, are partially functional, according to the United Nations, and are being forced to limit their services. Occupancy rates for inpatient departments are at more than 200% capacity, while intensive care units are reporting a staggering 250% capacity. The health system is, quote, on its knees, said the World Health Organization's director last weekend. As Israel continues to massacre Palestinians throughout the Gaza Strip, Israeli troops are being accused of arbitrarily detaining and torturing civilians in the territory. Israel's propaganda organs have attempted to pass off videos and photos of civilian detainees as surrendered Hamas fighters. 3 prominent Palestinian organizations have published harrowing testimony from people who were rounded up by Israeli troops in Gaza. The rights groups called for an end to the enforced disappearance of hundreds of Palestinian detainees, including dozens of women, and the immediate revelation of their names and whereabouts. They also demanded an end to, quote, the ongoing torture and abuse of people arbitrarily detained in Gaza. Since October 7th, 43 UN facilities that have been turned into shelters for internally displaced persons have been directly hit, and 60 installations have sustained collateral damage, according to the United Nations Agency for Palestine Refugees. More than 280 people sheltering in UN facilities have been killed, and more than 970 have been injured. Almost 1.9 million people in Gaza, or nearly 85% of the population, are estimated to be internally displaced. Many of them have been displaced multiple times, says the UN. Because of the overcrowded shelters and lack of basic water, food, sanitation, and medicine across Gaza, doctors are reporting significant increases in communicable diseases and infections, including diarrhea, flu, chickenpox, meningitis, jaundice, impetigo, acute respiratory tract infections, skin infections, and hygiene-related conditions. And hunger is soaring. The World Food Programme stated this week that 9 out of 10 Palestinians in the northern Gaza Strip are not eating every day, and that 2 in 3 people in the south don't have enough to eat either. Videos of Israeli soldiers burning food and water supplies in Shujaiya, Gaza City, circulated on social media on December 9th. Limited aid distributions continue to take place in the southern Rafah area, where almost half of Gaza's population is now estimated to be residing, the UN said. In the rest of the Gaza Strip, aid distribution has largely stopped due to the intensity of hostilities and restrictions on movement along the main roads, except for limited fuel deliveries to key service providers. In a press briefing in Geneva on Wednesday, the UN's humanitarian coordinator, Lynn Hastings, stated that allowing aid trucks to get to the border between Egypt and Gaza, quote, is insufficient. They need to ensure that the conditions inside of Gaza are also such that we will be able to provide assistance to everybody who is in need. Israel, as the occupying power, is responsible to protect the Palestinian civilian population. This means they have to provide for basic needs, Hastings said. Meanwhile, in the occupied West Bank, a large-scale, lethal Israeli raid on the northern occupied West Bank city of Jenin and its refugee camp entered its third day on Thursday. In a propaganda release, the Israeli military asserted that it started the raid in the early hours Tuesday, alongside the Shin Bet and other forces working under the command of the Menashe Division, a subgroup of the Israeli army active during the First and Second Intifadas that focused on the northern occupied West Bank cities of Jenin and Tulkarem. At least 10 Palestinians were killed during the Israeli attack, and a number of others were wounded as Israeli forces continued aerial attacks in the Jenin refugee camp, destroying infrastructure and shooting at Palestinians. Israeli forces have raided homes, in some cases using them as military bases, and arrested Palestinians. The Israeli army also besieged the eastern part of the city, blocking entrances and roads with armored vehicles and bulldozers. 4 Palestinians were killed when the Israeli army carried out a drone strike in Al-Sabat neighborhood in the city of Jenin on Tuesday, including a child. Israeli drone strikes in the occupied West Bank have killed 10 Palestinian children in 2023, while Israel has used a U.S.-made Apache helicopter to fire missiles that have killed 4 children. An Israeli warplane airstrike killed 1 additional child in the West Bank during that time. Israeli troops besieged the city's 3 main hospitals, blocking ambulances from reaching them. Israeli forces also impeded the movement of paramedics and carried out full searches of ambulances during the raid on Wednesday. Israeli troops also raided a mosque in Jenin during the campaign, and occupation forces raided the Freedom Theater as well and opened fire. Israeli soldiers destroyed offices, knocking down a wall between an office and a neighbor's home. Quote, for hours, the Israelis sat in the offices as sounds of hammering and shooting could be heard, the theater said. After raiding and causing damage in the theater, the army arrested the artistic director and the producer. As my colleague Tamara Nassar reported, the impunity with which Israel attacks hospitals in the Gaza Strip seems to have set a precedent that extends to the occupied West Bank as well. The Israeli army now routinely hinders Palestinian access to medical facilities and even attacks hospitals during its raids in the West Bank. And now we turn to our show today. We're joined by our frequent live stream contributor, Abdeljawad Omar, an academic and researcher at Birzeit University in the occupied West Bank. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Abdul Jawad, let's start by having you talk about the mass arrest campaign and the images that have been circulating that are identical to the ones that we've been seeing of Palestinians in Gaza who have been stripped and blindfolded and paraded around by Israeli soldiers.
There has been this Israeli yearning, if we want to position it as such, to shame Palestinian manhood and masculinity through this parading of men being semi-naked or mostly naked in front of cameras in a show of Israeli dominance, power over Palestinian masculinity and manhood. And I think it harkens back or echoes a heavily, an Israeli memory, which is, Arab armies kneeling down in the presence of Israeli military power, which means that, in this moment where October 7th happened as a military offensive campaign by the Palestinian resistance that was very heavily successful, where Israelis perceive also Palestinian masculinity being responsible for this injury to Israeli pride and power, to its iron wall, to its presence. It even discusses out loudly that this is an existential struggle, although most people would say this is an exaggeration, that it now needs these images as a sort of respite from the events of October 7th. It needs them as a sort of also message or symbolic message it sends to the Palestinian population, specifically in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and the Arab world more broadly, that it still has the power to undress, to disarm, to leave Palestinians as vulnerable bodies and to film them in very performative acts of dominance and power, etc. So I think this is one of the elements of the images that we're seeing. I think somewhat it backfired on Israel. I think most people did not really appreciate this form of propaganda, at least outside of Israel itself. And it backfired in ways that they did not perceive to be possible. But at the same time, what was also perhaps more absurd about these photos is that we end up knowing that most of these Palestinians are civilians, if not all of them. That they have no real relationship to resistance groups. And even when Israel starts backtracking, they said or claimed that some of these people have links, which is a very wide name, links to Hamas, links to Islamic Jihad. This is a very loose type of definition that they're being put forward. And the only videos we got from interrogations were from people who have served somewhat in the civil arm of the Palestinian governance apparatus in the Gaza Strip and have no real concrete affiliation, at least organizationally, to Hamas or Islamic Jihad or any of the other groups. And I think it also tells us something about what's happening on the ground in the sense that Israel wants these images of surrender but cannot really actually achieve them. In all the clashes that are happening with the resistance groups, even when there's a clash that goes against Palestinian resistance groups, the fighters are, martyred and killed, and they're not surrendering in any way, shape, or form. So I think in many ways there's also this yearning to see the surrender of Palestinian fighters, a redemption of Israeli power in the Gaza Strip. And what we're looking at operationally with the killing of and injuring of hundreds of soldiers and the killing of tens of soldiers, specifically in the past 2 days when we learned that the Golani Brigade suffered a heavy loss, that what's happening on the ground tells us a different story about the current fight unfolding in the Gaza Strip, where much of the commanders of the Israeli army, specifically those even anointed to be replacements for the current elite military brass in Israel, are being killed or injured and are being drained from the battle space in the Gaza Strip at this moment from those fighters that supposedly surrender en masse which turned out to be a complete false flag propaganda story. Yeah.
I'm bored listening to you, particularly talking about the desire of Israel to humiliate Palestinians, and particularly humiliate Palestinian men by stripping them naked and putting on this public display of dominance and humiliation. I'm reminded very much of what happened now almost 20 years ago during the US-led aggression and invasion on Iraq, when after the United States invaded, we saw the horrifying scenes of torture and abuse at Abu Ghraib and other places, where Iraqi men were stripped naked by American forces, the same American government that is sponsoring this genocide now in Gaza, and also stripping them naked in this way. And at the time, we learned that this was a deliberate strategy that was inspired by this racist book called The Arab Mind, written by this Hungarian-born so-called cultural anthropologist Raphael Patai, who later took Israeli citizenship, and who wrote this vile racist book claiming that Arab men are obsessed with sex, and yet at the same time they're ashamed of it. And so the way to break Arab men is through sexual humiliation. And they were using this racist book really as an operations manual in Iraq. So my question, so clearly those are old racist and colonial tropes that are not just unique to Iraq or Israel. But do you think this is a deliberate strategy on the part of Israel, the same way it was with the Americans when they invoked this racist and bogus doctrine of Raphael Patai?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's completely, it's completely targeted, or at least it tends to target Palestinian imaginary of, shaming us, of attempting, it's very deliberate. It's a symbolic message to Palestinian society first and foremost, before anybody else, in terms of rendering these men mostly naked and parading them in this way. And I think it does harken back to this kind of Orientalist, racist policies that you're mentioning, whether in Iraq or even with other racist and fascist regimes. Historically, that has been, a policy that was used by many such regimes that think the naked body is something that could be a source of either shame, and specifically when it comes to Arab men, then there's the whole Orientalist aspect that comes into play. Inaccurate. I mean, we don't need to respond to this Orientalist trope, but I think, it's a deliberate policy meant to humiliate the Palestinian men, and a symbolic message to Palestinian society more.
And what impact? I mean, you're in Palestine, and what impact are these images having? What reaction do they get?
I mean, the thing is that I think at this critical juncture, Ali, most people see this as a desperate attempt by Israel to showcase some sort of success. So they actually see it as Israeli weakness and not an Israeli strength. It's not really, making people afraid or in any way or shape or form. In fact, you can say that it's, it exposes Israeli power itself, that you're so hasty in terms of your propaganda videos. You're so deliberate in terms of attempting this form of humiliation that you can see through it. And I think most people, although they're very sympathetic to the people in the videos and, empathetic to their situation and predicament at that moment, being rendered, forced to perform these acts of being humiliated or handing a weapon or, in front of camera. But I think in many ways, most Palestinians see it as a sign of Israeli weakness, not as a sign of Israeli strength, because at least at this moment, Palestinians look at this and they say they can't get to the resistance, so they're attempting this form of, lousy propaganda. So in fact, Israel became, through these videos, even an object of ridicule for most Palestinians. It's not, it's not something that is coming across in any way or shape or form as something frightening or something of, and I want to say that this is not new in Palestinian, experience with the Israelis. Whether it's in interrogation rooms where things are not filmed, or whether it's in the Second Intifada or otherwise, people have been undressed in different ways, sexually abused, sexual humiliation and harassment has been used as a deliberate policy in torture chambers within Israel for a long time. So I think that for Palestinians, that experience is also part of our historical experience of dealing with this racist occupation that has persisted over Palestinian land. So it's nothing new as well. That's why I think,
and we should say, just related to this, that many of the young Palestinians and older Palestinians who came out of the prisons thanks to the deal forced on Israel by the resistance during the truce also said that they were frequently, explicitly threatened with sexual abuse and rape by the Israeli jailers. And that's something that Palestinians detained by Israel have reported for years. And in some cases, there have been documented sexual assaults. So this is a systematic policy in a way, or a continuum of policies that aim to try to degrade and humiliate Palestinians.
And also, Ali, it was obviously a campaign, because the first videos that came out, the IDF immediately commented on them and described them as leaked videos. And they immediately, the IDF said, their spokesperson said that the first batch of arrests that we saw, they said directly that they came out of a tunnel complaining about Sinwar. So they actually had more than just the photo op part. They had an additional part where they described that these fighters came out talking about Sinwar as if they were getting some kind of actionable intelligence. They've definitely backed off on that, but those first videos that we saw, the one that was staged they made the same man walk twice with his gun, and then they called those videos leaked. The IDF immediately used those. And so it's clearly part of a campaign, because there wouldn't be time for the IDF to digest that information about a leaked video that clearly isn't leaked. It's coming from their soldiers. So just to throw that in there.
Yeah, John, actually, let's bring you in and have you talk a little bit more about that. How exactly, like, what are the mechanisms that Israel is using here, in their attempt to substitute an image of victory for the Israeli army? I know that Abdul Jawad touched on it a little bit, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's part of a multi-pronged strategy, and one of the other elements of that strategy has been to exaggerate their successes, and to downgrade or completely censor their failures. And so we've been following on this show for 2 months about the situation about Israeli casualties. And we've been careful about it because we don't want to speculate. But we've been saying carefully that the videos that we've been watching clearly don't match to the injury reports. And I've been doing that since the beginning of this war, attempting to figure out which Qassam field report matches to which Israeli soldier was killed. And that was impossible. And Israel did that as part of a campaign to hide their information. And they're able to do that because they have a military censor. And so every story published in Israel is put through the IDF censor. So it doesn't get published until the IDF says it's okay. And the IDF didn't say it was okay. And so for the first 2 months of the war, nobody in Israel talked about that, probably in part because it was censored if you did talk about it. But this past week, we've seen reporting by Haaretz, Israel's leading liberal daily, where you could tell by the way that they're reporting that they were pushing the IDF's hand to start properly reporting casualties. For people who haven't followed along, the IDF has not released any tallies. They don't have any. They never say 75 soldiers have been killed in the ground invasion. They never say a number of injured and deaths combined as casualties. So they've been systematically covering up those numbers. But because they're covering it up, we weren't able to see how that process was working. But now we do, because this week Haaretz apparently pushed the IDF to release the casualty information. And in the process of releasing this casualty information, Haaretz wrote this story that talked about how in every single hospital in Israel, there's a 24/7 IDF monitoring of the hospital communications to ensure that no information was released. And this goes not just for numbers of injured, but anything that was considered to be suggestive of that. So, for example, they weren't reporting how many helicopters landed on their roof, because that kind of information would be suggestive of the type of injuries and the number of injuries that are coming. So before this week, we had no information on that. On Yom Kippur, which is an annual tradition in Israel, the Defense Ministry celebrates everyone who's died in wars defending Israel. And they put out the number back at the beginning. That was like late November. They put the number out as 2,000 people, 2,000 soldiers had been injured since October 7th. And so Haaretz, before that, that number was not acknowledged by the IDF. The spokesperson was not giving that as a number. And we know that the number that they were of injured just from October 7th, because a lot of people have been trying to find out what the casualty rate is for the ground war, because Israel has covered up the ground war casualty rate. And so Haaretz pushed this, and in doing so, they revealed a number of things that have been going on behind the scenes that we didn't hear about, namely that doctors in these hospitals in Israel were starting to push back against this censorship because they had very stringent restrictions on what they were allowed to say. And these doctors were upset about it because they believed that they're heroes, that the soldiers are heroes, that they're heroes for healing the soldiers. And they wanted to be part of this kind of national discussion about this war that everybody's involved with in Israel, right? 350,000 troops called up. The hospitals play a significant part in this, they believe, and they want to tell the story of these injured soldiers. And until, 14 December, until 12 December, from a war that started in October, they systematically covered up those numbers. And even still, the number that they released, that we saw just from that headline, they released a number around 1,500 that have been injured since October 7th. So that includes October 7th. But the second half of that headline you see there, but hospital data is much higher. So in the push that Haaretz was doing to get the IDF to release the information, Haaretz went around to each hospital in Israel, and each hospital categorizes soldier injuries. That's part of the process that they've done for the state of Israel since the beginning. This is all new for this war. Previously, there was tallies. I mean, normally in any wire story, that the tally of the fatalities is something that would be included in every wire story, right? At the bottom, this many Palestinians have been killed, this many Israelis have been killed. But that had not happened until this week. And so Haaretz got the data from the hospitals themselves. And if you see the numbers just from those hospitals, Ashkelon alone, which is the closest hospital to the Gaza Strip, according to Haaretz, this is as of last week's data, according to Haaretz, Ashkelon alone has 1,949 casualties. So 500 more than the IDF says total, because now the IDF is acknowledging a number. But even that number that they're reporting is a fraction of the number that the hospital data shows. At each of these hospitals, let me give you a couple more examples. Beersheba, which is the second closest hospital, it's 1,000 itself. So just those two hospitals right there are double the number that the IDF is claiming. And then there's then there's the Tel Aviv hospitals where people who are seriously injured go to. And those numbers are 700. So just from those three examples, and then there's dozens of hospitals all over Israel that have casualties in them as well. So we see on the one hand, using sexual violence as a tool to rob masculinity on the one hand to paint a picture of victory. And then on the other hand, you're hiding your stories of what's happening to your soldiers. And that has been percolating just under the surface in Israel. I was listening to the IDF spokesperson doing a Twitter space the other day, and somebody phoned into the Twitter space and said to him straight up, "Why are you covering up?" He said he was the uncle of a soldier who fought, a captain who fought. And he didn't understand why Israel wasn't telling the truth about their casualties, with the idea being that you're not telling stories of heroes. You're not creating an image of victory. You're not creating something that we can take back to our people that describes a sacrifice that was made for this devastating defeat that happened on October 7th. That's put a lot of core beliefs of their country into question. And some people in Israel believed that should be part of the fight back to what happened on October 7th, that you celebrate your heroes. So this is the first week of the war, now 7 weeks in, that this has happened. And you can see it happening in a structural way. The chief of staff, Halevi, he went to the rehab hospital yesterday and did a photo op with injured soldiers. Nobody has talked about injured soldiers in the IDF for this whole war. And he went and did this campaign. We'll probably talk about it more later in the show when we talk about Shujaiya. But as Abdul Jawad said, that Golani unit that got hit in Shujaiya the other day, they came out and described in detail what happened to their fighters. That's a first time. That hasn't happened. And so what we've seen, and we talked about it a couple shows ago, it does seem, though, that Israel came out of the fighting pause, and got basically feedback from their focus groups on what has to be done to build an image of victory that allows you to withdraw from this war with some semblance of at least operational legitimacy, because we know they've lost moral legitimacy. And so they want to have some kind of symbol of victory. And for the Israelis, because they don't have the operational or moral legitimacy to fall back on, their principal warfighting strategy is to stay alive. And we've seen that in part of the brutality of the massacres in the Gaza Strip is cowardice. It's cowardice of their soldiers who don't want to go and risk themselves. And so Israel believes that and you can see it by this whole story, that they believe operational success is synonymous with low casualties, which is, completely separate from the concept of defeating a guerrilla group that's embedded under the ground with tens of thousands of fighters who you are very clearly not going to fight under the ground. And so we're seeing it, and we see with the mass arrests, we see it with the hiding the casualties, and we've seen it even with their propaganda videos. We mock their videos, and we will again later in the show, but their videos have improved significantly over the last week. We saw our first Palestinian in a video 7 weeks into the war. And so they're telling these stories because they never had a video to send to their people, like the Times of Israel reporter who just repeats IDF numbers and stats, he said this is the most badass video that Israel has published through the war. So it's very obvious that they're attempting to ahead of time sort of deal with some of the questions that we've asked on this show the whole time. And according to this Haaretz report, even they're admitting to their casualties. They're admitting to like 15% of the casualties, which I think matches the videos. And we're going to watch more jelly beans later in the show. And I think you'll see that it's simply impossible that what was happening on the ground matched Israel releasing. The way that they released their casualties was individually, one name at a time. They never said 8 in this event, 10 in this event, 5 in this event. They didn't tell us where it happened. All that stuff is changing a little bit. They're starting to try to turn their heroes, their soldiers into heroes, emasculate the Palestinians and throw them in trucks so that people can meme them. And then they send out these on their WhatsApp groups and social media channels that act almost more than news, right? The people watch these social media channels, especially since October 7th. The social media channels are far more valuable for information for Israelis, which was the case on October 7th, than any news media. The media is weeks behind what's going on social
and
media.
That's true, I think, also in the West with the mainstream media that most of us have access to. We're going to talk about another story in a bit that they're not covering at all, that is even now the Israeli media is catching up with. But John, I guess the question I have for you is, so now I've also seen there's actually at least 2 videos in which Palestinians who were almost certainly fighters appear, aside from the videos of the professors and journalists and just hapless men that they abducted from UN shelters and then subjected to this humiliating treatment for these photo ops. But my question for you, John, is who do you think these videos are aimed at? Because we do know that, of course, on the one hand, we always have to be cautious in saying social media doesn't define the world. There is a world outside of social media. But at the same time, clearly, social media has a huge impact on perception, particularly when you look at younger demographics in the United States and around the world. And we see it's in the younger demographics where the support for Palestinians and the opposition to Israel is so high, far huge majority support for Palestinians. So social media is important. Now, from what I've seen, and then again, this is just my perspective, but I look at a lot of things, obviously, these videos of the so-called surrenders, the fake surrender videos that Israel has been producing, are getting no traction whatsoever outside of the narrow demographic of people who already support Israel. Whereas the videos that we're going to talk about and that we have been talking about over the last few months, 2 months, from the Palestinian resistance seem to be gaining more and more traction beyond just people who already know about or support Palestinians. Is that, do you share that perception, or what's your view of it? I'd love to hear from Abud about this as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think straight up that people watch those videos of the Palestinians being fearless, defending their communities, and people called them heroes. And Israel didn't have anything to counter that with. I mean, I see it in our comments that, we don't have any proof that these armored vehicles are being pierced by these Yassins or whatever. We do have a lot of evidence that they're being pierced, but even just to be able to counter that kind of propaganda with your own heroes, tell the stories about your own fighters, because October 7th is going to be studied in your country for the next, well, however many years your country lasts. People are going to be talking about that. So you want to be crafting, you want some heroes in this story, beyond the helicopter pilots who shot at, the kids on their way back to Gaza or what have you. Israel needed to show something beyond just their civilians wearing military uniforms being their spokespersons. So I think that there was pressure in their focus groups to make heroes. Somebody, is there zero heroes? Like, when you're watching the Palestinian videos and you can clearly see on social media, you can see, again, for the Palestinians, a lot of people that support the Palestinians think those videos are amazing. But you can tell that a lot of people that are kind of wouldn't say I'm a supporter, before October 7th, are watching these videos and just saying, like, my God, these are unbelievable. What we're witnessing from a helmet cam, whatever the opposite of staged is what those Palestinian videos are. And I think that their focus groups would have shown them that Qassam is winning the media war over this state that essentially crafted itself as the perfect media, activist. That they set up these whole departments of foreign Hasbara departments that are just dedicated to attacking college campuses, because they know they're losing these whole demographics of people. That I think their focus groups told them, like, humiliate some Palestinians and show some heroes, because it looks to us like you're just killing civilians, which is what it looks like to the whole world.
Abdeljawad, I want to know your thoughts on this propaganda war and how you're seeing this all play out.
I mean, it's very simple, I think, when it comes to the Palestinians, because it's, you have truth on your side. You don't have to engage in a lot of curation of your story. You don't have to engage in a lot of censorship or editing. I mean, it doesn't mean that there's no conscious sometimes propaganda here or there, but what it means is that you can present yourself and frame yourself authentically, and that also comes across with Al-Qassam videos and other military groups videos, where you see these fighters wearing slippers, engaging in armed combat with armored vehicles that each cost millions of dollars, using simple means. Much of these means are manufactured within Gaza itself, through the prowess of the engineering minds of the resistance itself, to create whatever tools that can be used in the fighting against one of the most advanced militaries. So I think that you're the underdog, you're heroic in terms of your belief in your own, in what you're doing and why you're fighting. And what is for me quite bizarre about Israeli propaganda is that it comes in this moment on October 7th, where Israelis feel a lot of injury to their national project, a moral injury as well that befallen on them, and you have all the mechanisms of creating, let's say, an authentic heroic story of triumph over Palestinian resistance, etc. But despite that, you're still very, very sensitive to the shock that could happen within Israeli society for any casualty rate that Israeli society will not tolerate. And this is one of the paradoxes of how Israel is dealing with its propaganda. On the one hand, it cannot really reach and touch the Palestinian fighters except through air power, and in very few cases did we see very close combat in these videos. And I think John, will probably show us later on that only a couple of these videos perhaps show some sort of actual fighting between Hamas fighters or Palestinian resistance fighters and Israeli troops, in close combat. And in many of these instances, you also see kind of when they're clashing, we don't necessarily see Israelis triumphing all the time. No, it's one of these elements where I think Israel is because it's too curated, because it's too edited, because it thinks over its propaganda too much, it ends up producing one of the worst information wars that we have seen since a while. I mean, it does in a way help it on some grounds. Maybe it protects, the unity within its own society. Maybe that's what's important about, expanding the temporal horizon of the war, and that's their priority. Maybe that's their thinking. But at least in terms of information warfare, in terms of the media war, in terms of PR, in terms of its ability to attract supporters, in terms of its ability to explain what it's doing, I think it's failing on all fronts. And not only that, it's losing all more grounds, as you guys have covered for the past 2 months or so. And at the same time, providing a fertile ground for Palestinians to speak their stories for now more ears that are willing to listen.
Well, Ali, I know that we also wanted to highlight a story that Asa, you wrote and we published a few days ago. That kind of, it's accumulation of everything that we've been talking about so far. Yeah, Ali, I know you wanted to say a few words.
Yeah, if we can put this up. Well, Asa can talk about this story. Asa, why don't you just introduce this? This is the story you wrote just the other day, but it's an important update.
Yeah, so you can see the headline there on screen. Israel admits to, quote, immense amount of what it calls friendly fire on the 7th of October. This is a short story I did just about the admission in Ynet by the military correspondent of Ynet, 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, who wrote just that. He wrote that that according to, well, let me get the exact quote up on screen. It's
while you do that, while you look for that quote, Asa, I'll also comment that for us, the most important part of the story written by 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 was sort of buried in the second to last paragraph, and it wasn't the headline. We'll come to. I want to talk about what the headline of the story was, but for us, the most important news in this story was buried in that penultimate paragraph.
Right, exactly. And unlike a lot of other of these stories about the 7th of October that have come out in the Israeli press, this one was translated into English. And the story in general was about how since the Israeli incursion into the Gaza Strip, we talked about casualties earlier in the stream, but they say that a certain number. What is it now, John? What are they saying now? It's 100 dead, is it?
Right. At the time of the story, it was 105, I think. Now they're admitting to, I think, as of this morning, 116. But
that's not including October 7th. That's just the soldiers in the street.
But Asa, I don't know if you have that quote from 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, but I think we should actually read it because it's so telling, especially the way that it's buried. Or I have it up here, I think.
I got it too.
Okay.
So the article is about how friendly fire has been happening. So-called friendly fire has been happening in the Gaza Strip. Basically, soldiers have been accidentally shooting each other while invading the Gaza Strip. But then at the end of this article, in the penultimate paragraph, it says this: casualties fell as a result of friendly fire on October 7, but the IDF, the so-called Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli military, believes that beyond the operational investigations of the events, it would not be morally sound to investigate these incidents due to the immense and complex quantity of them that took place in the kibbutzim and southern Israeli communities due to the challenging situations the soldiers were in at the time. End of quote. So this is a huge admission buried really towards the end of this article. You know, we have the military correspondent of one of Israel's most important mainstream media outlets saying that the Israeli military believes that there was an immense and complex quantity of so-called friendly fire incidents in the kibbutzim and in the southern Israeli communities. And this is exactly what we've been talking about.
That's what we've been saying all along from the very beginning, and we were reporting it. Of course, we had the testimony of Yasmin Porat, who survived the massacre at Kibbutz Be'eri, and in the last couple of days, the other Israeli woman who survived that massacre, Hadass Dagan, has also spoken for the first time to Israeli media, and she confirmed what Yasmin Porat said, that basically it was the tank shells that killed all the Israelis, including the little girl you see on the screen right now, Liel Hatzroni. So this is now, we have this admission, but we have something else. Tamara, I'm going to ask if you can put this up on the screen for us. I've just sent you this tweet I did, but it contains the images that I want to show exactly. So this op-ed appeared in Haaretz yesterday in the English edition and in the Hebrew edition. And it says, and that photo there is actually from Kibbutz Be'eri. And what we've been saying all along is that Kibbutz Be'eri, the images that show all these devastated and demolished houses are clearly the result of tank shelling, not the small arms that Hamas fighters were carrying. And as Yasmin Porat testified from the very beginning, the Hamas fighters, in her words, treated the Israelis in the kibbutz humanely. That was her word, be'ofen anushi in Hebrew, in a humane manner. And what now this article in Haaretz is calling for is saying, did Israel implement the so-called Hannibal Directive, which allows the military to endanger a soldier to prevent them from being kidnapped at the hostage-taking incident in Be'eri on October 7th. And Tamara, I don't know if we're able to show the other image or quote from this article, because the writer of this article asks directly, did Israel, here we go, we must determine exactly what happened that day being October 7th. Was there a decision to eliminate the terrorists, even if there was a significant risk that the hostages would also be killed? Was the Hannibal Directive applied to civilians? And she's not just saying, the author of this article is not just saying that Israeli civilians may have been killed accidentally as a result of indiscriminate fire. She's going further and asking, was the Hannibal Directive applied? In other words, was there a decision to open fire knowing that Israeli civilians would be killed? And of course, Asa, you'll recall the previous story you did just a few days ago about how an Israeli colonel admitted in Haaretz podcast that to use his term, a mass Hannibal was applied on October 7th. And this, in fact, lines up with the evidence, which is the hundreds of burned bodies, incinerated bodies, the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of incinerated cars, civilian cars, the footage we saw and we reported on over the last few weeks from Israeli helicopters of the Apache helicopters just strafing civilians indiscriminately. And of course, the tank shelling against the houses and the witness testimonies. All of that lines up, that physical evidence lines up with what Israelis themselves are saying and have been saying. What it doesn't line up with is the idea that the Hamas fighters did all that, because how were they going to do all that with their AK-47s, maybe some hand grenades, maybe the odd RPG, but nothing like the type of weapons that...
Not artillery to flatten a house wholesale.
Absolutely, or to incinerate literally hundreds of cars, highways of death, that could only have been done by the kind of weapons Israel possesses. Now, just to go back for a moment to the story that you reported on most recently, Asa, the one we just showed a moment ago, this story, the headline of your 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞 story, again, this is in Ynet, one of the main publications in Israel, is that 1 in 5 of the soldiers that Israel admits were killed in Gaza since the ground operation began. So now we're not talking about October 7th. We're talking about the ground invasion of Gaza, which began in mid to late October, after around 2 weeks or so after October 7th. So they're saying, according to the figures they're admitting to, as John has already told us, these figures are probably almost certainly a huge undercount. But they're saying, the Israelis are saying, 20% of our soldiers were killed by our soldiers. And this is in the context of a commanded and controlled military operation where presumably the Israelis believe that they are taking the initiative and they're on the offensive, and they're still killing 1 in 5 of their own soldiers.
Yeah.
What would be the case on October 7th when we know that the Gaza division, the Southern Command, completely collapsed? There was no command and control. According to the helicopter pilots and the accounts they've given in the Israeli press, they had no one giving them orders. They were just told, go up in your helicopter and shoot at anything that moves. Shoot at everything was the order, I'm quoting.
And some of the tanks just arrived by themselves.
And some of the tanks arrived by themselves. We had those two, again, going back to what John said, in an effort to create heroes, a couple of weeks ago, the Israelis put forward in the media these 3 young women who were driving around on October 7th in a tank. And the Israeli spin was, look at this girl power, look at these girl bosses driving a tank and killing terrorists. But what they actually said in the interview on Channel 12 was really disturbing to anyone who is just not completely brainwashed by the Israelis, which is that we were driving around in the tank. No one was giving us orders. We were firing weapons we weren't trained to use and never used before. And when we did encounter someone, she recounts at one of the kibbutzes, a man told her, I think it was an officer or a kibbutz security guard, shoot at that house. And she said, who's in it? Is it terrorists? Is it civilians? And he said, I don't know, just shoot anyway. So if it's 20% friendly fire, yeah, there we go. That's it. They put it out as this great example of heroics, but it was really an example of how completely chaotic it was. So 20% when they have strict command and control. John, is my interpretation correct to think that if they're killing 1 in 5 of their own soldiers when they're in control, that the number of their own people that they would be killing in a chaotic situation of total collapse on October 7th may well be considerably higher than that?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question. And I think there's going to be investigations in Israel into all of this. And that's part of the reason why they're lying is so it's going to end up becoming a catastrophe for their image when this stuff, well, if it comes out. I mean, I don't know what the way the media in the West works, but I mean, I think a lot of people would be surprised to hear that only one infant was killed on October 7th. I think people have been told for all this time, these numbers that are completely, both the Israeli numbers, all the numbers are just mangled in such a way that It's just propaganda piled on top of propaganda. And even that friendly fire story, they said that some of those people killed in friendly fire were killed by shrapnel in their controlled demolitions. So those propaganda videos, like in Nora's opening, where they show blowing up the Palestinian Legislative Council, like Palestinian Parliament, or blowing up a United Nations school, and the soldiers are all lying on the berm, hiding, watching, filming with their cameras, and then cheering. People died in those. So that's not a good way to go. If you're trying to create a hero and you're lying with your camera phone recording a completely unnecessary, like not from a bomb, they're actually wiring these buildings and then moving back and exploding the buildings and then killing their troops in that explosion. It's the level of absurdity.
Yeah.
I mean, I think 20% sounds really high. I think that, if we're going to speculate on it, I think what's going to happen is that the Israeli casualty count is going to go up considerably. It looked bad previously if they said 10 in a day, but now that they're reporting 10 every day, I think it's going to be easier for them to slip in the extra ones and to get that number up, because there's no way that 20% of what we've seen on camera of Israeli casualties is by their own forces, thereby lowering the number that have been killed by Palestinians, which is this kind of weird thing that Israel does, as if you kill your own people, it proves that the resistance isn't as strong as they thought it was, when really, and as we're going to show you in the next hour, you're killing each other because you're idiots and brutal at what you're doing.
Yeah.
And of course, indiscriminate. Exactly.
And indiscriminate.
Yeah. And as Tamara reported in the piece that she published this morning, the Israelis have also admitted to friendly fire injuries in the raid in Jenin over the past 3 days. So before we go to our next hour, in which we are going to show many jelly beans, as we're calling them, John, I wanted to ask you about the other kind of, symbolic kind of, Hasbara propaganda show of the flooding of the tunnels, which we covered last week, where the Israelis, were showing these images of, guiding a giant hose from the Mediterranean Sea into some, supposed opening of a tunnel on the beach. And they were, talking about how this is their plan now, and they're going to flood the tunnels, and they're going to, eliminate all the fighters inside. What can you say about what we know more about that?
Well, that story was almost 2 weeks ago. And now they're saying these are American sources that we're getting from this. The Israelis aren't talking about this. So it was American sources saying that the Israelis have begun this process that they said they had begun 2 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the good things to throw into this story, when Ali was talking about the logistics, is that the Israelis said they had 5 pumps north of Shati on the Mediterranean coast. And this Wall Street Journal article, they re-upped this Wall Street Journal article, and they say that adding 2 additional pumps is why they started. So from 5 to 7 pumps. And the story is framed around adding these 2 extra pumps. So now we got the 2 extras, we don't have 5, we got 7. Now we're going to flood a 500-kilometer tunnel network that has drainage, is an incredible feat of engineering that clearly they didn't forget about drainage. Anyone who's been in Gaza in the winter knows that drainage is a very significant issue. The place floods considerably. The sand alone is a problem for collapsing. So this is, again, just part of one of the pillars of creating an end game, because you have had all these people saying, Hamas's tunnels. So what's Israel going to do if they haven't found any? They don't even have an idea where their prisoners are being held, not even a faint clue. The prisoners who got out talked about that they got bombed on the way into Gaza. And then as soon as they got into the tunnels, it seemed like Israel was bombing the tunnels that they were in. So they have no idea. And this is just, I'll keep this short, but this is just another part of this propaganda campaign to craft an image of not even victory, but just like bare minimum success.
Yeah.
I'll just add quickly to this, John, that this Wall Street Journal story, which is pitched as an exclusive and, probably organized by the Israelis or whoever is doing PR for them, but even that story expresses doubt about the possibility of flooding the tunnels. They say that, there's hundreds of kilometers of them. They're not all connected. Maybe you could get a few of them. And for me, the real giveaway is that it says that the Israeli authorities believe that some of their prisoners of war are held in the tunnels. And in my estimation, they're most like, who are the prisoners left? It's the high value military prisoners and officers, and those are the ones that they're going to want to protect. I mean, I think that the resistance tried to protect everyone as best as they could, but they're definitely going to want to protect those POWs, and so they may well be in the tunnels. And so there's two possibilities. Either Israel wants to flood the tunnels and kill its own people who may well be held there. Israel says it believes they're held in the tunnels. That's possibility number one. Possibility number two is Israel knows that it can't really flood the tunnels, and so nothing will actually happen to its POWs who are down there.
The IDF experts themselves don't say. So Foreign Affairs, what Foreign Affairs magazine, like what Chomsky calls impeccable establishment credentials, they ran an article by the IDF's leading tunnels expert in the IDF, just in the early stages of the war, like a 3,000 word article. It doesn't say seawater. It doesn't say flood anywhere in the piece. Foreign Affairs ran a piece just the other day with someone about how to defeat Hamas. Nothing about seawater, nothing about flooding. So I mean,
grasping at straws. So before we go into our next hour of the program, Ali, I know that you had some important news that you wanted to share.
Yes, thank you, Nora. Just a quick update. I'm very happy to announce that some wonderfully generous supporters have come together, and they have pledged to fully match any donation to the Electronic Intifada between now and the end of the year, so up through December 31st, up to a total of $60,000. And this is amazing for us because, as you know, all of the reporting we do is funded by our supporters and readers. We are a completely independent publication, and all of the work we do, these live streams, our podcasts, the videos we put out, and especially all our reporting that you see on the website is funded by you. We're kind of like public radio, but way, way better. You don't get any of this from public radio.
We're not underwritten by
no, we
Chevron
don't have
or Boeing. Yeah,
exactly. We don't. We have you. We're underwritten by you, and I want to point out just that. For example, I'll give you an example. The story we talked about a few minutes ago, where Haaretz is now calling for an investigation of whether the Hannibal Doctrine was used on October 7th, whether Israel deliberately killed its own civilians. You can read that in the Israeli press. You can read that at the Electronic Intifada, but you know where you can't read it? The New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, CNN, the BBC, the list goes on. I don't know of a single mainstream publication that covered Yasmin Porat's testimony, that has covered any of this of the crucial developments that we have covered from the very beginning. And again, I want to highlight, Tamara, if you can go back to the front page, that every day we are publishing, and this is what I'm most proud of, reportage from our friends and colleagues in Gaza. You go to the front page of the Electronic Intifada now, we have direct reporting from Gaza that you will not find anywhere else. And we're immensely proud of that. We're immensely proud of the fact that many of the people who are writing these stories were mentored by our dear friend 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜, trained by him, and we owe it to him. And some of what we're publishing now are some of their tributes to 𝐓𝐡𝐞. And we're very, very proud of that. But all of this work we do with your support. So there's two things you can do right now. If you just go back to the front page, Tamara, go to the Electronic Intifada, and you can just hit that Donate Now button and make a donation, and it will be counted. It will be matched dollar for dollar. And you can also go to Get Updates and sign up for our email list. You'll not only get important information about our live streams and our latest stories every day, you'll get a newsletter with all our headlines in it once a day. But as soon as this live stream is over, we will send out an email with the details of this matching challenge that you can also share with any friends and family that you think might also want to support this. So please sign up for the email. You don't have to wait for us to send you that email. You can just hit Donate Now at the website, make a donation. It will be matched. The email we're going to send out will also contain our address. If you're in the United States and you want to send a check instead, then the address will be in that email. So do sign up, do make a donation, and thank you for all your support, because without you, we can't do this work. And we are determined to keep doing it, to keep amplifying our voices, your voices, and it's something we do together. Thank you.
It is. Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you to everybody who is keeping this platform vital and strong. And yeah, I'm very grateful. I know we all are. And so now we are going to move into our segment that I know many of you have been waiting for. We're going to talk about jelly beans and other snacks. Let's let's start with this first video for John. Why don't you set it up? And I want to hear Abdel Jawad's analysis to it afterwards. This was about a week ago, December 8th, in Gaza City. What we're calling a jump for joy. Can you set this up and talk about what we're going to be seeing here?
Yeah, so this is a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 video. Again, when we're talking about heroes, you're watching a tank enter the screen, point his barrel at the fighter, who apparently doesn't even flinch. And again, generally, you're seeing in these videos Palestinians using their terrain, using their home neighborhoods, understanding how to move through the rubble in a way the Israelis don't. And they're able to use both the destruction and the existing infrastructure. And there's our guy who became I think that image, we'll go to it. I cut one that's just him, so we'll go back to that. But again, you can see the proximity to the armed force, like to the armor. They're positioning themselves to get all of these shots. Our fighters are positioning themselves to get better shots. They're not, they're always on foot. In photography, it's called composing with your feet. Instead of zooming in, you get closer, and that's what we see throughout these videos. And so that guy, they showed in the earlier clip, they followed him from a separate street, and he hits the Israeli tank and yells. We cut the audio to try to help our jelly beans stay online, but he yells, "It's on fire." And jumps, like basically levitates. I don't know, Abdel Jawad, what was the reaction to that video in Palestine? I wish that I was watching it with my friends when it came out.
I mean, almost every video is dissected by people, and a lot of the symbolism within it or the words spoken are used in social media content. And here he says "ولعت," which means it burned up or it's on fire. That he saw it on fire, and I think it harkens back, I think, and echoes a lot of let's say Palestinian experiences when a stone hits, or when you feel your power and agency. And I think that authentic moment of him jumping, happily that he hit the tank and the tank burned, just I think it's part of every Palestinian to like just feel his happiness. But because I think that's a moment that we've all kind of experienced one way or another. That moment where we don't feel disempowered, but we feel empowered. So it spread quite heavily. It became a meme. It became a symbol. A lot of people did art around it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have plenty more. Let's go to also the same day on December 8th. This was Qassam in Gaza City. John, what can you tell us about this jelly bean?
So this is on the eastern edge of Gaza City. And again, all of these videos show the same basic thing. The Israelis are not outside of their armored vehicles. Palestinians have apparently an unlimited supply of Gaza-made Yasin warheads. This is an attack tunnel being used to carry out an operation. So the tunnel already existed, and the Palestinians are using it there to come in behind the Israeli positions, which is why they're not clearing any of this territory. This is a Shawaz, a Palestinian-made bomb that they're using. They're using it against troop positions inside buildings. Again, you're seeing them walk through walls here. I mean, maybe Abdul Jawad could talk more about this too, but I remember back in the Second Intifada when the Israelis blew holes in walls and walked through them, and like all these postmodern philosophers were like, oh, they walk through walls, they transcend the environment, and it was like this whole thing about how brilliant they were. And then we just see Palestinians doing it as a matter of fact. And then this guy, he's breaking out the back fence that's locked, and he's going to run across an open space here. And then watch this. He realizes, oh, there's a massive 2,000-pound bomb crater. So he can't get right up, because I believe that he would have run right up to it. But you could see his head cam look down at the hole. He stops, takes his breath, steadies himself, fires, hits in the soft spot of the tank on the side, which Palestinians are trained to do. And then this, to me, is really important. He returns. And Abu Ubaidah talks about this too now. So that's an attack tunnel that you're seeing there being used. So Abu Ubaidah talks about this too, where he says the fighters returned back home. These are not martyrdom missions. These are fighters carrying out operations and returning to their bases safely afterwards. And I think that's an important thing, because we're seeing that on that camera. First of all, this clip right here, the courage to do this, to run across an open space as a tank unit is moving with drones in the air, and to creep to get a closer shot. The heroism of this, there's just nothing even close to this in Israeli videos. And you don't even need to analyze the video. You can just watch that person with his helmet cam take you into the middle of the fight in Gaza City, and show a tank being hit. That's the tank being hit. That's not the burn off of the active reactive armor. That's a hit. Again, and we're looking at a Palestinian homemade, a Palestinian copy of a Soviet weapon that's very effective against armored vehicles. And we're seeing that in the field reports that talk about, basically an armored vehicle an hour being taken out.
Abdul Jawad, yeah. Did you have anything you wanted to say about this one?
I mean, yeah, there's also, I mean, if we notice, there's sometimes POV videos, sometimes it's a squad with multiple persons, and then they have one who takes, care of filming. And I think for resistance, that it was very important always to showcase people the power of resistance itself, and that's why such videos always amplify the resistant act, by telling people that the tank is defeatable, that the Israeli soldier is vulnerable. I mean, and Hezbollah was the primary and the innovator in this field, and then it was transferred to many of the Palestinian groups. And I just wanted to also mention something that John was mentioning, the whole notion of walking through the walls, which was, called inverted geometry, where the movement of troops, Israeli troops, would move through Palestinian homes through holes. I think that, just to say that that was actually a Palestinian tactic before it became an Israeli tactic of movement. It was used in multiple operations, specifically in Hebron in 2001, and then Israeli basically copycatted it and used it more on a wide-scale military movement within the Jenin refugee camp and Balata and other places. Which also tells us something about the history of the duality between resistance and the Israeli army, in a sense that they both learn from each other, but they will also develop their tactics based on how the other interacts with them. And I think one of the successes that we see, in terms of the information war happening, at least for the Palestinian resistance, the Qassam brigades, and also Saraya al-Quds and others, is that it's telling Palestinians what an organized force can actually do. And some of them, they're bits and pieces of the war, and they're mostly, as we see, hit squads that operate clandestinely. They reach their targets, then return to their tunnel, I guess, or wherever they came from. But what it says is that also the type and the nature of the fight, that people should not think too much of regular defensive positions as a regular war would be. Like, occupying space is not the central here. Is that what you do with this occupation of space, and how do these two fighting forces interact, one with small squads that can do sometimes combined armed maneuvers, or do some traps, like what happened to 𝐄𝐥𝐞 the other day, and then retreat with little harm. And that's what is actually very tough for Israel in this war. And what the videos show is that these resistant fighters, as John was mentioning, they're not conducting martyrdom operations. They're actually trying to prolong the fighting force itself and attempting a long, drawn-out war where they preserve their fighting force and fighting power as much as possible. Of course, many would also be killed and martyred through air power and other means that Israeli has. But at the same time, we get a glimpse to an extensive array of videos, because these videos have to come back and they have to be edited and they have to be released. So all the videos we're getting are actually from squads that make it back alive.
And but one thing I want to point out is what you say makes me think. What we're seeing in the videos in terms of the fighting forces of the Palestinians, I call them the Palestinian Defense Forces, is discipline. They are disciplined. And you see that both in terms of the individuals. Sometimes when you see one person going, as we saw in that video, crossing an open field, the amount of determination and discipline that takes. But when you see them fighting as groups, carrying out joint operations, everyone has their role. They're very disciplined, including the camera person. Sometimes that camera person is the person who's shooting, and they're, clearly wearing a camera on their head, but not always. Sometimes it's another person shooting. Sometimes the shot is from a completely different angle, which makes me think that there is as much thought and training into its media strategy as it does into its fighting and tactical strategy. And you see that in the videos. The other thing, in contrast to the Israelis, well, I want to say the Palestinians are disciplined in contrast to the lack of discipline of the Israelis, because not only are they putting out these official IDF videos that John is going to talk us through in a minute, but you also have the Israeli soldiers themselves putting out videos in these very undisciplined ways. For example, the soldier who blew up a mosque and dedicated that to his daughter, and that just revolted. Probably that made people very proud in Israel, but it just revolted people back home. Or the video of the Israeli soldier looting a necklace, saying, "Look at this silver necklace I found." Or the soldier going through the intimate apparel and belongings of a Palestinian woman in her bedroom who clearly had been forced to flee her home, but then mocking her. And all of this, they think, look how fantastic we are, but it just disgusts people. And then, of course, there was the video of an Israeli soldier just destroying a toy store for no reason, as if to say, not only are we going to murder all the children, but we're also going to destroy all the toys in Gaza. And you never see that from the Palestinian side. You never see these undisciplined videos from Palestinian fighters or Palestinian groups. Everything they put out is directly to the matter at hand, which is fighting the Israelis. And just to me, that's just such a sharp contrast.
Mm-hmm.
No, indeed. I mean, I think they are, highly disciplined force. I mean, one testament to that is that you had 1,200, I guess, fighters waking up one morning, not knowing that they have to go on a mission to break down one of the most complex walls that has ever been built in the history of humanity. They just woke up, and that day they were given the orders. So it tells you not only how disciplined they are, how willing and committed they are, and how they can take things through their own hands. And I think this is what we're also seeing in terms of the videos, in terms of their production, in terms of their release, and also in terms of their impact, whether in the Arab world or Palestinian society, but also perhaps with a wider international audience that is looking at these and seeing the commitment and determination of the Palestinians to liberate their homeland.
Well, we have plenty more to show you. Let's go to a clip from December 10th. This is Qassam in Khan Yunis in the south.
Right. So the fight moves down to Khan Yunis, where the Israelis said that the Palestinians had concentrated their forces. And here we see Israeli soldiers out in the open. We can all count them. There's 4 there. And this is a fragmentation grenade on the end of this Yasin that he's firing. So he's firing a different weapon than the anti-tank weapon. And you see these soldiers out in the open space. And this is before, so the fragmentation grenade doesn't need to hit the troops. It hits the wall behind the troops. And you can see at least 5 go down there. And so Israel never reports 5 soldiers hit by a frag grenade in Khan Yunis. So it's difficult to, and this is another open troop. So these are Palestinians that are showing you at least severely wounded situations that the Israelis themselves weren't. So these videos are available to everyone in Israel. And then the doctors are told that night that they can't report on the civilians. So let's go to the next one.
Do we know how much they're circulating in Israel? I mean, surely some Israelis are seeing them on social media, but Israeli television is not playing them.
No.
I mean, we don't really know. I mean, it would be interesting if anyone is watching from Israel to let us know in the comments if these are being seen. It would be very interesting to know.
I mean, I know they watch Nasrallah's speech. The soldiers watch Abu Ubaidah and Nasrallah's speeches. I've seen wire photos where they're over the shoulder of Israeli soldiers watching.
Yeah, and I'd
Abu
be
Hadi.
curious to know if, for example, obviously there's a huge number of Palestinians in Israel who have their media and their publications, but they're probably carefully monitored by the Shin Bet. But the Palestinians in Israel also consume by default, because they have to, it's Israeli and Hebrew media. And I'd like to know if any Palestinians...
Well, we have one up on the screen there, Dusty 48. Is that maybe 48? Maybe that's coming from Israel saying, no, they're not showing any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suspect they don't. I know that some Israel, because I've been tweeting them with Hebrew captions on Twitter, and then you'll get some responses in Hebrew, but clearly there's some people that see them, but not the mass public, perhaps.
Let's show the next one, Tamara. Yeah. This is the Palestinian Air Force. Okay, well that shot there was a tunnel that we saw. Let's do the drone one, clip 2, Tamara, from Khan Yunis, because this is a remarkable thing that the Palestinians have been able to create, to be able to use drones to drop munitions. And so we see here on the ground, those are tanks on the ground there, and they're dropping a Yasin warhead from a drone. We can see the Yasin there, and you can see to the right that there's tanks all stacked up, and the drone decides to fly over the troop carrier and drop it on the troop carrier, not on... See, you can see to the right of the screen there, it's like a tank parking lot. That tank the troop carriers appeared to move away from them, and they've targeted that. So we're seeing in these videos, first of all, we're seeing a Palestinian Air Force, and that's a fairly remarkable drone to be able to carry that warhead. But I'm not a technologist, but I'd be curious to know how much more weight they can carry than that, because that's a significant warhead to drop from a drone. But we're seeing in all of these videos, the resistance is choosing its targets. It's not just, grabbing and firing, gripping and ripping, or whatever the soldiers call it. They're moving in over that armed camp and dropping, by the way, a direct hit. So they clearly were training. And we know some of this from the Israeli attempts to cover up what happened on October 7th, or to make it seem like they knew what was going to happen, that they talk about all of this open training that was happening in Gaza. And that's clearly the case, because whoever's flying that drone is able to position the warhead over the tank from a significant height and hit it, which is not nothing. So yeah, just want to show that Palestinian Air Force.
And just as a reminder, John, we saw videos like this on October 7th.
Yes, this was the foundation of October 7th, was to break through the wall using drones that took out the automatic systems from the...
And we saw them dropping munitions from the air on tanks on October 7th, and on one of those automated machine gun nests with precise accuracy. And also we've seen them since the ground invasion began. We've seen them using these airdropped munitions against troops who are just like camping out in the open and not paying any attention. Behind these, they're being in cleared areas, and the Israelis will have dug high sand berms on all sides in order to protect them. But then the drone flies over them and drops the munition from the air. Incredible stuff.
We have more jelly beans, different flavors. Let's go to the next day, December 11th. This is Sarai Al-Quds in east of Gaza City, perhaps Shujaiya. Let's go to that one and see what kind of flavor we got.
Again, walking through walls. It's called mouse holing. to get a position in a damaged building. The Israelis have already damaged that building, believing that they'd cleared it, waiting for the armored personnel carrier to pass to hit the weak spot in the back of the door. And this is, again, picking its targets. You can see that it's part of a convoy. I mean, Hezbollah did this in 2006, where they would hit the back of the convoy and the front of the convoy and get the middle tank stuck in between the two.
What's that red circle pointing out in the video?
I think that's just a light on the front of the...
I thought there was a red circle by whoever made the video.
No, I think it's the light.
No, earlier, but I think... I don't know if we need to replay it from the beginning, but we can go through and then maybe start it again.
So they're hitting the back doors, which is something that we know that they train to do, because when the Israelis raided a Qassam camp in Beit Lahia earlier in the war, they showed an Eitan wheeled armored vehicle model, scale size model. And the Eitan hadn't even been deployed yet. It was rushed into service on October 7th. But before that, it was not in service. So we know the Palestinians are creating...
There, you see, look, that's that red circle.
Oh, that's a piece of a piece of the armor.
What it's highlight, but they put that red circle on Qassam, who made this video,
to show chunks of the vehicle.
To show chunks of the vehicle, because often the question people ask is, well, how do we know that this is actually doing damage? In this video,
I see what you're saying.
Showing big chunks, and then in one of their more recent videos, which I think came out yesterday, they actually show pieces of mangled Israeli armor that they walk on, that they step on. So again, that's about that. It seems to me that they are answering the question that people have,
but passing on the bulldozer again. So you see, they identify the bulldozer. They even flashed it in red to show us that they're going to pass on it, which is what we talked about a couple shows ago from Shujaiya, where they passed on the bulldozer in order to hit the troop carrier. And they're not hitting the troop carrier from the front. They're waiting for it to pass to hit it in the back door where it's believed to be weakest. And we know from October 7th that Qassam fighters went into Israel with diagrams that reminded them, like little operation cards that showed them which vehicle would respond and how long it would take for each vehicle to respond, and then where to hit that vehicle. And so that was the preparation for October 7th. And now it's just being used on a mass scale by these convoys of vehicles. I think the next question that we want to know is who's evacuating these? We don't know the answer to that yet.
Yeah, there have been some videos of footage of destroyed or very mangled tanks and APCs being kind of dragged to some place somewhere.
They drag them off. And I think the ones that are really destroyed, if they evacuate them, they blow them up. They don't want the resistance to get a hold of these for propaganda value. So again, but you see, waiting till it gets, and then moving forward, not firing from the safe spot, moving forward. And again, a lot of this stuff is learned on the streets. That vehicle
incredible.
Can't shoot you when its gun is pointed forward. It takes time.
Look at that angle he's shooting from. You see all that mangled metal in front of him. I'd be so terrified to hit something like that and the grenade bounces back on me. I mean, just the level of skill and confidence that shows is unbelievable.
Yes. All right. Let's go to December 13th. That was yesterday.
This is yesterday.
Qassam in Gaza City. What can we find here?
Again, just and Abdel Jawad, I want you to jump into when you see things, but just the remarkable number of Yassins that we're seeing that clearly have a stockpile to fight these important battles months into the war.
I mean, I think the Yassin was one of the largest investment that the resistance made. It's sensible. It could be manufactured locally. It replicates Russian weaponry. but at the same time you can have a huge number of.
So that soldier's outside the tank there. Sorry, I'm just drawing.
No, sure. Yes.
He's outside the tank. So that's a killed in action. This is a soldier in a window. Okay. There's no other way that goes. So those are two exposed soldiers. And this is the resistance using an attack tunnel that clearly has just been dug. So this is not a previously dug tunnel. They're able to add an attack tunnel, then wire the Shawaz, which is an explosively formed penetrator, which is an anti-armor weapon, and then again withdraw back to safety and remotely detonate it. And there we see pierced armor. This is chunks of armor, and we're about to see coming up here captured Israeli gear, right? So while they're faking photos of metal shop workers arrested who have been sheltering at a hospital for 2 months.
The Israelis are faking.
Yeah, the Israelis faking it. We haven't seen any Palestinian kit in any Israeli videos. They show us rusty guns.
They showed almost like paper mache, the Yassins that the resistance groups use for like military parades.
Yeah,
they showed us like the fake.
Yeah, they showed us parade. They showed us parade rockets.
Yeah,
and the Palestinians are showing us gear from their soldiers that were used. Okay, watch this here. You can see his head. They'll freeze it here. You can see he's riding. He's riding outside of the tank. And it's just a quick clip. And they move on to the next one. It's not, and it's recent.
Mm.
I mean, there's also just a small note. I mean, you can also see that Israelis, generally speaking, are either in armored vehicles or within, built buildings or houses, Palestinian houses. So they're not necessarily moving very freely in terms of open space. They're generally speaking trying to take, defensive positions even when they enter. And that's why most of the operations in the videos we see are this type of interaction.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one thing that I find very striking is that when you think about what it takes to put these videos out, just also we're more than 2 months into the genocide, into the genocidal war, and about 2 months into the ground invasion, and there's still, again, that phrase that the military end is like command and control. Their media operation is still functioning. They're still able to put out videos, whether it's from Khan Yunis or whether it's from Shuja'iyya, whether it's from Sheikh Radwan, and some videos combine clips from different places. So that operation, the media operation, is still working. They have the communications ability to do it. But I don't know if everyone knows how these videos typically roll out. How do we get them? Well, Telegram, which is a messaging app, and it's one which has much less censorship than many of the big tech ones that exist in the United States that we're all familiar with. So a lot of groups, and this is true, Telegram became very prominent in the context of the war in Ukraine as an outlet for war-related information from both sides in that war. And in the context of Gaza, Qassam and Sarai al-Quds used Telegram to put these videos out. Although, by the way, their channels are blocked on the app versions, on the phone app. So if you're on your smartphone, you cannot see these videos. And I assume that's because Apple and Google, which owns Android, have been told you have to, or they have told Telegram, you have to block these channels or we're going to kick you out of our app store. But on the web versions of these of Telegram, you can see the videos. And typically what happens is that Qassam Abu Ubaidah, its spokesperson, will put out written messages on the Telegram channel saying, in Shuja'iyah, our fighters carried out an operation which did A, B, C, and D. And in Khan Yunis, they carried out an operation which did A, B, C, and D. And you read these messages and you say, wow, that sounds pretty spectacular. Some people would say, is this just boastful claims? But then invariably, a few hours later or the next day, sometimes it's the next day, they put out a video. And if it doesn't show everything that's in the statement, it shows you enough in order to believe that the statement is entirely credible. So that's just some of the mechanics of how this information gets out. And also these videos, we talked about how they're not seen very much in Israel. They're definitely not seen much in the United States, but they are aired on pretty much every major channel in the Arab world, first and foremost Al Jazeera, and sometimes they come out on Al Jazeera first. In other words, Al Jazeera will say, oh, we just obtained this footage, and Al Jazeera will air it, and so hundreds of millions of people are seeing it. And then it will appear on the Telegram channel, which means somehow they're also getting it to the TV channels first. And all that is to say it's a very disciplined media operation, and one which continues to function just as efficiently despite everything Israel has done to try to stop it.
And promptly. That's the other thing, Ali, is that promptly. We're not getting videos from 2 weeks ago. This is not a best of. We saw in Shuja'iyah that they were able to respond to the assassination of Wissam Farhat within 36 hours. Abu Ubaidah's speech the other day, which people, the Israelis were saying that he was out of contact and that that they'd lost Abu Ubaidah and whatnot. And he gives a speech where he clearly identifies events that happened like 6 hours ago. So they're promptly able to edit, distribute, comment on what's happening. Nobody's trapped, separated from this information. They have clear command and control. It's not like they just do a dump at the end of the day where all of their field reports are. They're coming out all throughout the day. They clearly are capable of doing this. They're clearly capable of sharing the information with Al Jazeera and then themselves publishing the same videos. So it's clear there's a credibility to the videos, but there's also a credibility to the timeline of the videos that demonstrates clear command and control.
We have 3 short clips next, also from yesterday in Khan Yunis in the south. And just like we spoke about at the very beginning, Khan Yunis has been heavily attacked by Israeli forces. And so here we see the resistance clearly defending the community. Let's go to those clips.
So this appears to be an Al-Ghul sniper rifle, which is a Palestinian a tweak on a 50 cal sniper rifle. It clearly hits that soldier, although we do see a few misses. But again, that's another Palestinian weapon that we're seeing be used in Khan Yunis that we didn't see a lot of in the north, both probably because of the way the invasion happened, but also because there's no reason for them to throw all of their best material at the first day of a mechanized invasion. This is a guerrilla war where the advances of the guerrillas happen over time, not meeting face to face. And so again, this is a video that we clearly see multiple, at least severe injuries, and they don't match with Israeli reports that are coming out. But these kind of sniper attacks, again, with Palestinian weapons, Palestinian versions of existing weapons.
And do we have more clips from that day?
Yeah, so we get in this clip, tank close hit, parts flying off of it. You can see the actual shell in the air on that one. This clip is 1 minute and 20 seconds long, and we see 4 direct hits. That's a Merkava Mark III, so they're actually using their older tanks now in the field, which we've seen. This is an RPG-29, which fires a Yasin warhead that we also haven't seen be used in the north much, but now hitting with an RPG-29 a tank that's close enough that you could literally touch it. This is just using the environment. Again, this is their home neighborhood, and they're using their own environment to fight this battle. And the longer the war goes on, the more able the Palestinians are to fight this battle, not less.
Are you sure about that, John? Because the Israeli Chief of Staff 𝐓𝐡𝐞 𝐄𝐥𝐞𝐜 said that yes, we took a severe blow. It's hard fighting, but we've pretty much mopped up the resistance in the north. It's just a couple of days, and it will all be mission accomplished. I mean, why would the Israeli Chief of Staff lie? That just doesn't sound like a top Israeli official to me.
Well, so now they're saying, they're telling journalists, the IDF's telling journalists that they've killed 7,000 Hamas fighters. They're not saying that publicly through their spokesperson. He's not saying that yet, but they're telling them 7,000. So why don't we give them 7,000? There's still 23,000 minimum more Qassam fighters, probably 33,000 more than that would be my number, closer to. And then you've got 10 other armed factions that are all fighting as well.
And also, John, their concept is that they talk, again, it's hard to tell how much is propaganda and how much they actually believe, but it strikes me that they conceive, or at least their public pronouncements conceive of, and we've talked about this before, of Qassam as this top-down operation, and that if you get Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, or if you get Frehat, or if you get that, the whole thing will collapse. But what we're seeing in the video is that these guys are trained and they know what to do. They don't need somebody giving them orders every 5 minutes. In other words, that it's probably very decentralized, and they have their orders, they have their methods. And so they're able to operate even if they're cut off in a certain area. Is that do I have that right? John, I think you're still muted. Yeah.
They have the Palestinians are able to replace their leadership, and their leadership is obviously very important to the movement, and it always has been. But the record of history clearly shows that you can't decapitate an organization like this. This is an organized, structured. At this point, they're able to replace their people. Their people are important, but the thing isn't going to fall apart. But if one person were to die, but one person isn't dying, we're not hearing of any senior leadership, at least not the top leadership. Tamara, let's show the one last one. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's also important to note that with modern militaries, there's always this haste of like conquest and occupation of space, as I said before. But actually, what happens, and this is why the advantage becomes more in line with the Palestinian strategy of resistance, is that the more you cannot rely on air power, the more that the battle becomes more equal. So the more Israel penetrates the Gaza Strip and its troops are on the ground, either you get all these friendly fire incidents that some of them are presumably by air power, or you will also see that their advantage in terms of armory and also their force distribution is belied by the ability of the Palestinian resistance to generate small squads and cells that can hurt them every day, incurring injuries and accumulating like deaths. And what we're seeing actually on the Israeli side is the death of many commanders and the injury of many commanders. Only today we had another Golani commander getting injured, a severe injury, who was replacing another Golani commander in the beginning of the war who was injured with a severe injury. So I mean, and besides the Golani commanders that were already killed. So you get also what is being drained in Israeli military is its fighting commanders, its brains. It's not only normal soldiers or like the sergeants. It's also the brains of the military maneuver within the Gaza Strip. Anyways.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Can we let's go to this next clip?
Yeah, clip 3.
Yeah.
So this is the Israelis taking up a position inside a school, right? Because their main propaganda is that Qassam uses schools, which the Israelis are using, and they ambush the school. Unfortunately it's on mute because of the censors, but you can hear the Israeli soldiers who are taking up this place in a base, using this school as a base, verbally reacting to the unfortunate ambush that's happening that we're not showing. But you can see that even their bases are under attack. They can't defend even the most basic space where their soldiers are in. And then afterwards, they'll tell us that after this clip, the Israelis describe how the Palestinians fought in a school where their troops were. So it's just the layers of propaganda. But in the second half of this clip, it's fierce fighting. It's unfortunate that we can't have the volume because of the censor, but I think it's worth it to try to keep us on air. But just a ferocious fight, close quarters combat happening. And here we see, this is what I want. So this is their resupply truck. Okay, this is their fuel truck. And this is presumably Qassam recon unit demonstrating that they're literally sitting in the cab of the resupply truck, the fuel truck, full access. We haven't had a field report about what happened to this situation, but this is a separate truck, not the same truck that they're showing. So access to their resupply, taking down their flag here that they're marking as their base. And then Tamara, if you could just queue up the Israeli video after this, because when we see this kind of access to their resupply, it gives us a sense of why the Israelis were forced, as they were earlier in this week, they bragged about this. I'm not sure this is brag-worthy, but they bragged about how they had to use an airdrop. This is an airdrop from a C-130, dropping supplies to troops in Khan Yunis. Okay, Khan Yunis is admittedly the widest area of the Gaza Strip, but that's saying more about the rest of the Gaza Strip than it is about how wide Khan Yunis is. The fact that they can't even resupply their own troops in a war zone that's 5 miles away from their home territory, where they have hundreds of thousands of troops. And then they bragged about this. This is what Israel puts out as their videos. They're showing this, and they said this unit hadn't operated and done an airlift since 2006, which was the last time the Israelis attempted a war and got smoked. So it's not clear that this is brag-worthy, but it is significant to note that they need airlifts. They need airdrops to resupply their troops in Khan Yunis. 7 days after they began the war in Khan Yunis. So I don't know if anyone else has anything to contribute to that, but it's not a brag-worthy statement.
No, it tells you that they're in trouble, no, John? It's if you have to drop from there because you can't resupply the troops in a very narrow strip, it's a very small. You don't need. Supposedly, you shouldn't need that supply, but it tells you that you're under fire, and logistics routes, are the most important thing for a moving army. And if you're deprived from your logistics and cornered, you have a problem. You have a big problem in terms of your troop deployment, in terms of preserving them, and in terms of keeping them safe and able to fight.
Yeah, there's a good map that Tamara brought up there. So you can see the distance. You're talking about a tiny I mean, the whole story of Gaza is how tiny, and it's a prison, right? People call it an open air prison because it's like the size of, like, what is it? 40 kilometers long and 8 kilometers wide. And you have 350, you'd bragged about 350,000 reservists called up. They're all around the border, and you need airdrops. I don't
Amazing.
know how you guys feel about the time. We have a couple videos of the Israelis that I think a lot of people saw, where they shot up the empty school and just dump their clips and replace their clips.
Maybe we can show, I think people have seen those, but there was a great video of a former U.S. Army Ranger assessing those videos. So maybe that's what we should watch and talk
we'll
about.
skip right to that. So we'll introduce this guy. This is Greg Stoker. He describes that he's an Army Ranger that was in the Joint Special Operations Command in Afghanistan. So basically spent 10 years of his life carrying out night raids, clearing rooms, entering houses, and just doing all of this fighting, as many American soldiers did, right? And that's part of the reason why we've seen these critiques of the Israeli army, is that we have a million Americans who fought this exact kind of war. So let's just show it.
So I got tagged in this fake IDF combat footage, and it's a good thing for them it's fake, because if it was real, they would totally get smoked. Like, a lot of weird stuff is happening that I've never seen before. Like, this guy takes out a grenade, walks in front of his buddy's gun to throw it. Like, that's a great way to get shot in the ass, right? You guys know not to do that. They're doing this super bizarre thing where they all take turns shooting into the breach, which is like super disorganized, stupid, and fucking dangerous. Oh, and they're just dumping rounds, because you know what you want to do when fighting high-intensity urban combat operations? Run out of ammunition. And this is also not how you clear a room, right? There's an entire area to the left that nobody cleared. And if there was a dude crouching in the corner with an AK, they're all done. We're gonna run through this one more time because we don't want to miss anything, okay? So go in front of your buddy's gun, cool. Shoot at something, I don't know what. And then he throws another grenade. And this is why frigging you don't want to throw grenades unless you actually have to. Because look, okay, well, we have to wait for him to play like Rambo for a second. Yeah, you can't see anything because the dust. Can't see anything. It's even worse under night vision. So yeah, and then we've got this BS clearance. Okay, they're not pushing to go clear those rooms at all. They're just standing around. Like, what even is this? One more thing, that thing right there mounted on the gun, that looks like a sophisticated LA5 infrared laser sight. Look, it's been a minute, but when I was in, only special operations units had these. Not only is this not combat footage, and they're shooting at nothing and not actually clearing anything, but are these Israeli commandos? Does anyone know Israeli kit good enough to be able to tell? Please let me know. Because if they are special operations units, then, whoa, we're gonna need a whole lot more diapers.
But and to be clear, that was Israeli army footage that was released.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, that story is actually, first of all, there's things that he doesn't talk about there. The one soldier walks by, if you watch it again, he taps his buddy on the head with his grenade. He taps him on the head with the grenade. And in their propaganda video, it's longer than that. It's more absurd than what he describes. They describe that the Palestinian in the room grabbed the muzzle of the gun of the special forces soldier, and he had to wrestle the gun. Like, it's
And I've seen, I mean, I pointed this out. I can't remember now if it was on a live stream or in one of our own discussions.
He taps him on the head with the grenade.
Yeah, but in the other videos too, where they're shooting up empty schools, you see them walking in front of each other's guns. And I imagine it's very easy to pull that trigger by mistake, especially if you've got high adrenaline or just everything that's going on in that situation. Well, I guess you'd have high adrenaline in a real combat situation, not in a fake combat situation. But nonetheless, walking in front of each other's guns practically while they're firing. I've seen that in other videos.
Every video. They walk in front of each other's guns in every video. And that is the first day of gun anything, never mind special forces clearing rooms.
Well, and that might explain why they're claiming that 20% of their combat deaths are Israeli soldiers shooting other Israeli soldiers, or dying in what they call accidents, but who knows what that means.
Amazing.
Yeah. And the dumping the ammo thing is something that the soldier pointed out is a dumb idea, but it's visible to anyone who's not a military person that they're just, look at the cartridges. There's no way you want to be stuck. If you need airdrops in Khan Yunis, you don't want to be stuck without ammunition if you're actually fighting. But when they are fighting, they're inside their tanks and getting hit from behind, which is something that normal infantry walks beside the tanks so that you can clear an intersection and someone can't come out and shoot you from behind. So yeah, you can just watch in this video how many times they point their guns at each other. Just
amazing.
Over and over.
But what are they even trying to do? I mean, this is like a closed, dark hallway.
Yeah, they shoot down hallways. They shoot into rooms.
They hate walls. It's an anti-Semitic wall.
Yeah, obviously. Oh,
they also hate school desks and school chairs, and we know they hate school.
The air.
Someone joked that, I mean, it's not a joke, sadly, that the reason they're going around schools and shooting is they want to make sure that there are no children left alive. Yeah. Sadly, that's a reflection of reality.
Incredible. Well, I think that's all the jelly beans we had to show. I know there will be more. There are always more, and we'll have more on our next live stream. Ali, let's just wrap up and talk about if there's anything that you want to say, especially about the coverage, especially about
one thing I want to say is reiterate what you said at the beginning, Nora. We are still heartbroken over the murder of Rifat Al-Ar'ir. We are going to be heartbroken for a long time. We feel his absence, and I know we've talked about how good it was for us to be able to celebrate his life together on the live stream last Monday. And also we heard from so many people how much they appreciated it, and people are still watching it. That video is there so people can share it, and many of Rifat's students and colleagues are writing tributes to him that we're publishing. And I just want to say thank you to everyone for all the messages of support. I have replied to many of them, but I haven't yet been able to reply to all of them. But I want you to know how deeply they touched us and continue to touch us. And it's amazing to see how far and wide Rifat's influence and work have gone and continue to go. And we're going to continue that journey. He gave us that injunction to tell the tale, to tell the stories. And that's what we're going to keep doing. And we appreciate your support in doing it. So as I said earlier, don't forget, sign up for our updates on the email list. We do currently, until December 31st, any donation will be matched. I'll tell you personally, it's no fun. We don't like asking for contributions, but that's how our work is financed. And typically we raise most of the money for the coming year at the end of the year. So that's why we do this in December. This year, I would like to spend as little time doing this and focus the vast majority of my time on the work, on the reporting. That's what we all want to do. So please take advantage of this challenge. Your donation will be matched, and you can just go to Electronic Intifada and hit donate now, or sign up for the email. And as soon as we go offline, we're going to send out that email with more details. But again, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. And we also want to thank Tamara Nassar behind the scenes, doing brilliant work as always. And for Abdul Jawad Omar, who we're always so delighted when you come on and you just you just shine the light that needs to be shown in analysis. And so thank you.
Thanks,
And of course, you're welcome anytime. John, Asa, Ali, Tamara, Abdul Jawad, thank you so much. And we will see you next time. Be safe,
Thanks, guys.
everyone.
Thank you.